Thanks for joining us here. We again are doing a day-night doubleheader. This is the second. Earlier today, we talked to David Sampson about our tribal future. And now we're diving into what is possibly one of the more, I used this term before, psychedelic understandings of Bitcoin. We're talking about the article Bitcoin is Time by the inimitable Gigi. And in this article, Gigi is going to lay out for us and help us understand that there are actually two times. There is the one on my wrist, the seconds and minutes and hours, but then there is the time that is kept by Bitcoin, which is blocks. And how can we leave the native understanding of time that we have, which is that what we're born with, and we understand it the same way we do gravity, which is that we don't really understand it at all. We just live in it. So how can we kind of bring our understanding to this new and perhaps even more real, in such that real is real, understanding of what time is. And to do that, to lead us off, as always, our leadoff hitter, undefeated world champion.
Coming off the bench just for this. That's right.
Bring it to
Coming
us,
off
man.
the top rope.
Tell me about time.
To engage in this psychedelic endeavor of unraveling time in digital space. We're going to see what this is all about. This essay could be very technical. We could make it super technical. You can get deep into the bowels of Bitcoin's operation on the mathematics and all that. I'm going to say that we're not going to do that because we don't want to, because we're going to make
That's a nice way to say it. Let's just say it's
Also-
because we don't have the intellectual horsepower between the two of us.
Yeah, I've been cradling Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos here, going over and over again the chapters on cryptographic hash functions, the blockchain. But we're going to take this at a high level because this is a very philosophical essay, and that's what we want to talk about. This essay is about time and its relation to money in really two broad ways. First, time is money. It's a popular saying, but there's also some truth to that. Time makes something usable as money. Time enforces scarcity in the real world. We think of the value of gold. We could say that it is valuable because it is yellow. Probably not. We could say it is valuable because it takes a lot of time to dredge it up from the earth and to bring it to our usage, introduce into circulation. The time behind gold mining makes it valuable. We're going to see the time behind Bitcoin, the time it takes to mine, the time it takes to do computation is going to make Bitcoin valuable. Also, the second part and the bulk of this essay, money requires time. Money requires time to order its transaction. It requires a sort of physical law structure of time in order to ensure that if I give something to one person, I can't then turn around and give it to another person, that I gave it to one person first, and if I try to give it to another person second, we can determine who has priority between the two. This is the double spend problem. This essay actually helps us understand the double spend problem at a deeper level. If you've heard that phrase, the double spend problem, kind of wondering, why is this even a problem? Discussing time really gets us to the pith of that. And as I said, the second sense, money requiring time for its operation to order transactions, to determine which transactions are valid, that's going to occupy the bulk of this essay. A quick summary of the argument then of this essay, the structure of it. Money in a digital age requires ledgers. Ledgers then require an unambiguous order to the transactions that occur on the ledger, and order requires time. Yes.
Money as such requires ledgers, right? Not just in digital, but in physical.
There can be two types. We're going to talk about that in a second.
Yep.
So, ledgers require an unambiguous order to transactions that occur on the ledger, and order requires time. Then a trustless ledger, which is what we want, must maintain its own time, because if you want to be truly trustless, you can't trust time as such from any external source. You can't look at the luminary clock in the sky, as Gigi has a quote, I think, from Alden or Elliot. You can't trust any external source. No physical protocol can even gaze up at the sky, obviously. It is in its own locked-in space where time does not exist. And to be trustless, it can't trust anybody else to tell it what the time is. And yet, to be functional for us, it must have a sense of time. But let's rewind to the first point, and we're going to get to Lucas's point here. Money in the digital age requires ledgers. What else could money be? Well, there's two types, Gigi points out, two ways to account for, we may say anything, but here, at least for the purposes of money, there can be a ledger or a token. A token is a physical, tangible thing. You give somebody a token in the real world, and they then have that token, and you don't. It's a unique collection of atoms. That's a token. A ledger is different. A ledger is an accounting book in which to transfer one thing to another person, you make a debit in one account and you write it out in as a positive account in the other person's balance. So the difference, tokens directly represent the state of who has what. You literally have the physical coin. So they're trustless. You don't have to trust that you have the physical coin. The laws of space and time, thermodynamics, ensure that coin is what you have. Ledgers indirectly represent the state of things. They're lists, they're account books. They need a designated ledger keeper, and you have to then trust that ledger keeper to keep the ledger in a trustworthy fashion. And here's one final point on this. This is what kind of Lucas was getting at. In the digital realm, there is only the ledger. You can't have tokens in the digital realm. And this is such a brilliant observation in this essay. And one of the recurring themes in talking about Bitcoin now is Bitcoin, not crypto. And one of the things that crypto people talk about is having digital tokens. We know after reading this essay that digital tokens are a contradiction. Tokens are physical, real world, tangible things. Why does this matter? If you say a digital token, you're presuming that you can move the token around in digital space, but there is no movement in digital space. There is no space, properly speaking. We call it that kind of as an abstraction. When you move, quote unquote, in digital space, you copy something in one location and paste it in another. Did it move? No, because it's now in two places, right? It's where you copied it from and where you pasted it to. You now have two of the thing, unless you trust a centralized ledger keeper to delete the thing that was copied and pasted. So digital ledgers then require trust if you're going to, quote unquote, move value digitally or move anything digitally, because you have to trust that the person maintaining the ledger not only added the thing in one person's balance, but also deleted it in the other. So that's the first, I guess, really premise and observation of this essay. And if you stop watching right now, you got more than enough value from this conversation, because this is such a brilliant observation that there are tokens and ledgers, and there can only be ledgers in digital space.
Yeah. So ledgers are accounting. Ledgers are not, ledgers are an abstraction of what occurs in the real world. When I take $50 out of my account and I give it to you and you put it in your account, I did that physically. But what happened on the back end was that there's this abstraction, there's this digital accounting, there's this digital record that also reflects that. And it's so important for us to understand that the token is a physical thing, that there is not a token in the digital world. There is an abstraction of a token, that this thing does not actually move, because how could it move? Because digital it has no space. It has no physics.
Turns out Tron was not a documentary.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, how do we think about that? And the way that I put that into my mind was we had an instance with the band. We went up and we played in South Dakota. We came back, we stopped at a gas station, and late at night, some people are sleeping, some people are not, fill up with fuel. We get in and we get out. And in my mind, I had a ledger of who had gotten off the bus and who was sleeping when I left the bus. And so I got back in, and in my mind, my ledger said that everybody was on the bus. I took off. A mile down the road, I got a call from my guitar player standing outside the gas station saying that we left it. And I realized then, like later on, I'd heard a story from a traveling band that talked about The way that they accounted for that was they had their hats. And if you're on the bus, your hat is on the dash. That's your physical token that lets you know that you're there. Much like in the essay, Gigi talks about the shepherd bringing in the sheep, and you could either count the sheep and make a mark, or you could take the collar off the sheep and hang it on the wall. That's the token. You could always miscount, but you can't. There's a hook for every collar, and there's a collar for every sheep.
Yeah.
So that's more that is the real world, and the ledger is just a reflection of the real world. And this is why I struggled a lot with the trustless idea, because we think about trust is good. I want to
Yeah.
trust, I trust you. That's like people do business with those that they know, they like, and most importantly that they trust.
Yeah.
And um this understanding that in order for a monetary system to be pure, to work well, it cannot have trust. And Jason Lowry explained this so well in Software. The vagaries and the failings of a trusted system is that there is no example of a centralized system. The Catholic Church, the United States government, your Little League baseball coach, there's no example ever in history of trust that was put into a centralized system where that trust was not abused
Yeah.
at the benefit of the trusted and at the detriment of the trusting.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And from our conversation with David Sampson this morning, like, he looks at Bitcoin as the resolution of the evolutionary problem of who we can trust, not because we can trust Bitcoin, but because we don't have to trust it. It eliminates this requirement of trust.
yes. And
Yeah.
so we can then scale trust infinitely,
Yeah.
and that we can trust in the system that we don't have to trust
Yeah.
because it is verified.
Yeah. So that's the first part. Money in a digital age requires ledgers. The second part, ledgers will then require an unambiguous order to the transactions that occur on the ledger, and orders require time. Ledgers have to make sure that transactions are sequential in time. This is the double spend problem. So a person in the real world, if they have a physical token, they can't double spend that. If they give the gold coin to one person, they can't turn around and give it to somebody else.
I can't have my hat on my head and also on the dash of the bus.
Yes, very true. Ledgers, though, you could do something like that in a sort of metaphorical sense. You can give the token to somebody and keep in your hand if you just like do some creative accounting, right? But if time is enforced on the ledger such that there's an order to the transactions, where if you do transaction 1 at point 1 in time and you try to do it again at point 2 in time, you're barred from doing that. If you have time to order your transactions, if you can timestamp your transactions, then you can, even on a ledger, enforce and prevent the double spend problem. This is essentially creating a before and an after, essential to time. Usually this is done in a centralized way with a ledger. We have a trusted party, one person, determine what the true time is, operate the ledger, and also timestamp all the transactions on the ledger. Again, though, this requires trusting a third party, trusting the source of time, not just the person who's doing the math, but also if somebody's telling that person the time that a transaction occurs, you need to be able to trust that person telling you the time. This is the very, very wild thing with this. Any external source of time that's an input into the digital realm could potentially be manipulated. This is a global distributed adversarial system, Bitcoin is. We have to assume everybody's an adversarial party. If anybody tells you anything, you want to be able to verify that. We can't then trust anybody to feed the time into Bitcoin to timestamp all the transactions. This is the real central problem of Bitcoin. Can a ledger that is not operated by a central entity take its time from somewhere that is not manipulable? And again, this is like, it's in digital space, it's informational, it's not in the real world. There is no time inside the computer except for the time that we impose on it through external timekeeping mechanisms. A distributed ledger needs to synchronize the state of this system without having recourse to an external trusted input of time. Bitcoin's solution then is going to be to create time internal to it, to create its own sense of time in terms of its own internal functioning, using only its own parts in anything that we put into it, any way that we interact with it. Satoshi had to sit down at a desk and a table and say, how can I use existing hashing algorithms, existing cryptography, the way that we're going to interact with them to create time in digital space. And he was able to do that. This is quite the solution. Bitcoin's own internal time as well, we're going to see, not to get ahead of ourselves, we're going to see that internal time that it creates through the functioning of its parts is going to bridge over into real world time so that we can then measure it in minutes in a sense too. Bitcoin solution that is overall is going to be to create an internal timekeeping mechanism, which is itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we used to have bearer money. We used to have the gold coins and the silver coins and cash. And then we moved to a system of we could write drafts and we could have checks. And when we wrote a check, we instantiated our own timekeeping mechanism on this by the date that we put on the check that we wrote it. And that, because we could control it individually, that could be manipulated. When I grew up, I very distinctly remember my mother writing checks that were future dated. We owe you $100 or whatever. So here's a check, but today's August 5th. I wrote August 10th on there because the money's not there right now. And if you go try to cash that check, you won't get the money and I'll get an overdraft, or maybe you'll get the money and I will get an overdraft if the bank is going to back you. But you're altering that timestamp on your own, and people figured out a way. Like, I'm sure it didn't take very long for people to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
That they could future date checks. And so we had to figure out a way to solve for that type of manipulation as well. And so that's one part of it, which is the time. But then the other part of it is this decentralized part. So we know that we can't trust any one source. We can't trust the Pope. We can't trust the president. We can't trust the guy down the street, only because they have their own priorities. And those priorities, while maybe similar in the same direction to ours, don't perfectly match ours. And by the way, maybe our priorities are not great either.
Yeah.
And so we have to have this decentralized thing. And because the thought that I had before about introducing this as like a psychedelic conversation is that thinking of the Bitcoin ledger as a mycorrhizal structure, as the root system of mushrooms, which, you go out and you look and there's all these mushrooms, but they're all one organism and they all share the same structure, much like there's a forest up in, I think it's Utah, it looks as though there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of trees, but in actuality, they are all of the same root system. And so you can't pull one tree out by its roots because it has no root. It has roots that are embedded with all of the other ones. And so this is where I went back to this idea of, okay, so time is money. Money is the root of all evil, but I believe that money has only been the root of all evil and described as such because it had a root. It had a centralized ledger. And when we remove that centralized ledger and we replace it with a decentralized one, I think what we do is we remove the evil from the system, in that we give this sustainability so that it cannot be violated by any one individual. That's what
We remove the evil from the system by removing the humans from the system.
Correct.
To a certain extent, we're going to see there's going to be a human input, but the input is not going to be something that determines it.
Randomness of humans.
Yes, and it's going to be an essential part of it. So, I mentioned where we're going with this, where Gigi is going. Bitcoin is going to have to turn itself into an internal timekeeping mechanism because it can't trust external time. But before Bitcoin can be described as a timekeeping mechanism, If you're in the digital realm, you need to understand what it is you are measuring. That is, what is time? This is a very philosophical essay because dear Gigi needs to inquire into what time is in order to understand what is it that Bitcoin is keeping a measure of through its operation. How do you keep time digitally if time doesn't exist digitally? There is no kind of indigenous digital time. There is a timeless informational realm. It's eternal. It's instant. It's instantaneous. It's all these things except for sequential arrow of time type reality that we live in, where there is a now, which is on one side the past that has happened, and the other side the future that is to come, and we're moving along the arrow of time into the future. The digital realm is not like that. Time, dear Gigi says, has two key aspects in the physical realm that Bitcoin is going to have to take account of if it wants to recreate some sense of time in the digital realm. The first is causality. There is a before and an after. The before causes the after. This arrow of time moves forward in a causal sort of way. But that's not the only thing it is. It also has to be unpredictable. It has to be causal, but unpredictable. It can't just be a mathematical function of adding one. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. That's predictable. The future is not perfectly predictable. If it was, it would collapse into the now, everything would be at once. There needs to be entropy to have time, some sense of change, really, but we can call it entropy. We need something that is causal, but not predictable. A good metaphor might be the scrambling of an egg. You can't predict the exact resulting form of the scramble. Even as you know, causally, applying heat to the egg is going to result in the scramble. You can't predict how that mush is going to look. So how can we do this for the digital realm then? We need causality and unpredictability. I guess before we even go there to the solution, is there anything you wanted to add to that as a notion of time requires causality and unpredictability? Does that seem correct to you, that if you want to talk about what time is in the physical world, before we even get to the digital world, does it make sense to talk about it in those two key ways?
I think so. Then the way that I'm thinking about it is just thinking about the life of a human, is that the past is the causal. The past is the chain of events that led me to be the person that I am. But the future is the unpredictability that, although dependent upon who I am, and therefore dependent upon the chain of events that led to this moment, in the future, I do have freedom. I have freedom is unpredictability. And so I have the freedom and the unpredictability to alter my course of actions, do what I want. I can jump off the roof. I can take a bath. I can go for a run. I can do any of these things into the future. So I sit here in the now at the intersection of the solidness of the causality and the structurelessness of the unpredictable. And that to me makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that not just the yeah, that the future is unpredictable even though it is causal. There's some seeming contradiction there, but we call it free will. Maybe we can call it entropy too in physical processes. And we're gonna see how Satoshi did in some sense use for human free will, harness that to make Bitcoin unpredictable and therefore give it a notion of time. So let's talk about that. How can this be done in the digital realm? How can we get causation and unpredictability? This is something that could take us deep into kind of the mathematical operation of Bitcoin, which is a realm we don't want to go into. So we're going to talk about it, not superficially, but we're going to maybe gloss over some things. So first, how can we get causality in the digital realm? We can create causality through one-way functions, trapdoor functions. A cryptographic hash function is one of these, digital signatures as well, but let's focus on the former. You have in a cryptographic hash function a before state, which is the data you want to hash. You then hash that data and you create a unique fingerprint of that data, which is the hash. You get an after state, which is that fingerprint. I say after state because you cannot have that fingerprint reliably without having that pre-image prior state. If you have that hash, that fingerprint, and then somebody produces a pre-image to show that if you place it into the algorithm, you get this hash state, you know they had that pre-image before the hash, because otherwise it would have been just, practically impossible to come up with a 256-bit hash without having the pre-image that led to the hash. So a cryptographic hash function gives us a one-way function, gives us causality. Like the scrambling of an egg, it's easy to scramble an egg or do a hash function, but effectively impossible to reverse the function or unscramble the egg. The data that is hashed or scrambled had to exist before the resulting hash. So now we have causality, the beginning of time, through computational irreversibility. Now we have to get to unpredictability. We have causality in digital space with cryptographic hash functions, which are one-way functions. How do we get to unpredictability? Lucas mentioned it, like human free will. How can we bring human free will into the digital realm? Well, we can't predict the peer-to-peer transactions that are going to occur on the Bitcoin network. So that's one way that the real world reaches in unpredictably into the digital world, into the digital protocol to add randomness, is the peer-to-peer transactions that occur in a block, in the next block. We can't predict how all these human agents are going to transact, right? So now we have a source of unpredictability we can feed into the protocol, the transactions. What is the second source of unpredictability? The resolution of the proof of work puzzle that mines a block. The act of finding a solution for the target hash of the next block to be mined can only be done by making guesses. This is how mining works. It's probabilistic because there is no approach to finding the right answer that is quicker other than to have a miner that makes as many guesses as possible, just trillions or whatever of guesses, until you, by luck, solve the proof of work puzzle. It's unpredictable. So now we have two ways to bring to resolve causality and unpredictability in digital space. We have rather mathematical ways to do that and ways that we can bring the real world into digital space as a source of unpredictability specifically. So with these pieces, we can have time in the digital realm. Causality through one-way hash functions, unpredictability because transactions on the ledger will be unknowable in advance, and because proof of work as a way to add a block of transaction can proceed only by making guesses. With that possible, we can then see how Bitcoin keeps track of time, how it is a timekeeping mechanism. But before we get to that, I mean, that's kind of the hairiest part of this essay, I think, is talking about like the mathematical and practical ways that causality and unpredictability can be established. Does that all make sense, kind of?
I mean, the way I'm trying to think about this is, so you mentioned when we talked about this before that the naming structure is that there's the parent block and then there's the child block. And much like you can take a mathematical proof and you look at the proof and you can't have the answer immediately, but once you go through the proof of work to get down to the bottom and find the answer, you can put the answer in and you can see very quickly whether it's right or wrong. And so I think of this kind of like having children, where you have, you're bringing together the causality, the knowns, the parents, and then the child is coming out, and you have something that you can look at a couple and you can go, oh, I might be able to kind of imagine maybe what their children will look like, but you can't really nail it down. But once they have children, you're standing there and you're like, okay, these two people had 2 children. Here's 8 children. Which 2 are theirs? And you can go, oh, it's those 2.
Children
Like you can identify them.
Children are a cryptographic hash function.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so I that's the way that I'm like trying to visualize this and put it into my head.
Metaphors are
so that I
good.
can make it work. But one thing I want to, and I hate that I'm putting you on the spot, but I have to, because I want to make sure that not just me, but people that listen to this understand we're saying hashing a lot.
Yes.
Can we define hashing?
No, I can't. I'll do my best though. So again, as an emotional support animal or blanket, I've been cradling Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos. Define hashing. Let's maybe talk around the definition. So a hash, like hash browns. What is a hash? It's literally like a chopped up mess, right? Yeah. And so a hash function is a way that you take a fixed set of data and then produce a scrambled up result that seemingly it's just totally different looking than the data set that went in.
Yeah.
And yet that data set will always produce that same hash of that data set. If you change one period in that data set, you will get a completely different hash. Every part of it will be rearranged. So the SHA-256, which is the hashing algorithm, SHA simple hashing algorithm, is a 256-bit algorithm. So there's 256 bits of information that are in this hash. And so it's a one-way function, this hashing algorithm, because it's trivially easy to do to plug in what is called a pre-image and then get the resulting hash through this hash function. But it's like practical, unless you have like a quantum computer, which does not exist, you can't reverse it to get to the pre-image from the hash.
So
So
we can take the potato and we can chop it up and we can make a hash brown, and we can
yeah,
take another potato and we can chop it up in the exact same matter, but we won't get the exact same hash brown because we didn't have this same potato to start.
yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's called second pre-image resistance. When you have a hash, you can't then come up with find another pre-image that will lead to the same hash. Yeah. So hashes have certain cryptographic properties. There's also collision resistance, where if you have a hashing function, it's not going to produce the same hash with different data sets. Yeah. So there's all of these things that make a hash function this very interesting thing. And for the purposes of this essay, make it what we call a one-way or a trapdoor function. We know what a trapdoor is. You fall through the bottom, but you can't, get back through the trap. That's what a hash function is. For the purposes of this essay, again, just know we need causality to have time. One way to have causality is a one-way function. So the closest way to approximate that aspect of time in digital space is through a hash function. I don't know if that was like Satoshi's insight, but it's brilliant. Whoever incited it, if that's a word. So
we really do hash children because we
cut them up.
Because we bring the same genetic material together, and we have the first child.
Yeah.
And then we bring the same genetic material together again, and we have a different child. And we have a different child because no man walks through the same river twice, because he's not the same man and it's not the same river. You're down the road. You're not the same potato.
Right. So the way that a hashing algorithm works, how it does the math, I don't know if that's the same combinatorial math that's done with our genetics. I think it's... Yeah. Okay, there we go. I do know. Yeah. I do know that much. But it's a good example. And a lot of this, throughout this conversation, you have heard already, and you will continue to hear, that we're giving metaphorical examples to gloss over these very technical processes.
We're not that smart.
Because we're not that smart. So also Gigi does it too. He is smart. We have license to use metaphor. Our metaphors are a lot more dumberer than his, but we're doing our best. Now that we have time is possible in the digital realm, we have causality through one-way hash functions. We have unpredictability through uncertain transactions, and through the unpredictable resolution of the proof of work puzzle. With that, time is possible in the digital realm. We can see how Bitcoin keeps track of time. Now that we have time, we can see how Bitcoin keeps track of time, how it is a timekeeping mechanism, right? We had to establish time to get to the timekeeper. What is a timekeeper? A timekeeper is something that marks units of time, the ticking of a clock, the seconds, the pendulum swinging back and forth, a metronome, something that at regular intervals, I don't know what it does. It measures entropic change or something. It's even difficult to say what's happening, but it's seconds, minutes, etc. Something tick-tock.
If you think of what a pendulum is, it is traveling a distance at a speed in order to have time. So a
determinate speed that we think is kind of maintaining the same speed. So to mark off the same.
But we know that it's not, because of entropy and friction and wind resistance, all barometric pressure, and everything, right? So that's why we have to go into things that have less, they're less affected by those things, which, like you mentioned before, or not in this, but like cesium, like measuring vibrational frequency of a particle.
Yes. You notice that Lucas is saying, you mentioned this before, we had this conversation once, and in true Christopher Nolan style, we wanted to do something interesting with time, so we trashed that conversation. So when Lucas says what you said before, he's actually referring to something that I will say in the future now.
This is correct.
Yeah, so we're kind of playing with a sense of time.
I love the movie Tenet. I actually understood it.
You were the only one, so... what Bitcoin does with time. How is it a clock? How is it a timekeeping mechanism? This is absolutely brilliant and stunning in just to understand. It's an insight into time itself. The ticking of the Bitcoin blockchain is the processing of a block. TikTok next block. We hear this phrase. The internal sense of time that Bitcoin creates is just the processing of a block. That is the tick of the clock. So it's doing something on a regular interval at an interval. We haven't established its regularity yet, but that is processing blocks. It's doing something regularly, like a metronome swings back and forth regularly. So there is a ticking. Now we have a type of clock, this type of ticking that is internal to the Bitcoin network, that does not depend on appeal to an external clock outside of the network. Rather, the solving of the hash function embedded in the next block to be mined leads to the processing of that block and the ticking of the clock, that is Bitcoin. A ticking that is done probabilistically through the solving of this hash function. We're going to talk about why probabilistically in a minute. A way that relies on computation to generate guesses. Computation relies on energy. And there's a lot of moving parts here. I think we'll stop here, though, just to marvel or reflect on Bitcoin as a mechanism that acts as its own time and also creates time as such.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So to go back to something that we mentioned before is that digital space has no space.
Yes.
There's no physics. There's no length, width, height, thickness. It just is truly a realm ungoverned by the laws that we live by, the laws of physics. And Bitcoin has done something that has never been done, which is bridge the digital realm with the physical realm and impose the laws of physics into the digital realm without introducing entropy, which is, I can get on board with people that say that this is the singularity, because there is now a bridge between the physical world and the digital world where the laws of physics from the physical world are imposed on that digital world. And so to take that a step further, we talked a little bit just now about time. So when we're calculating time using, say, a pendulum, or even when we're using measuring the back and forth motion of this cesium particle, time is distance over, or sorry, speed is distance over time. And so since there is no distance in the physical realm, we can just call that a constant. We can call that a 1. And so then we end up with speed equals 1 over time. And then we can invert that and we can say time equals 1 over speed. And so the more speed, so the more guesses, the faster the guesses are being guessed in order to solve the block, the less time it takes to solve the block. And the less speed, the fewer guesses, the more time it takes to solve that block. So I think we've been able to have kind of an understanding of how our definition of time is applying here sans the distance without having that physical realm.
And this leads into the next intricate part of this whole mechanism. We're going to need a way to bridge the two times such that if we input more guesses into this intricate mechanism, we don't solve the blocks quicker and quicker, such that we solve one block 10 minutes, the next solution comes in 5 minutes, the next solution comes in 1 minute, because we're getting better and better at putting guesses into it. So this part of the whole Bitcoin mechanism protocol is called the difficulty adjustment. Digital time, through the difficulty adjustment, bridges over to our human world. We need a way to make the Bitcoin protocol process blocks at an interval that stays roughly the same and is sufficiently long such that it can propagate transactions or block processing over all the network, all the nodes. So we need to keep time at a steady human interval.
Can we riff on why do we have to have that?
Why
do we have to have why does it have to be 10 minutes or
It doesn't have to be 10 minutes.
but I mean, why
Yeah.
does it have to be a roughly consistent time? What is the value in that? I
N-
guess the value in that is that if we didn't have that, then we wouldn't have causality.
Um, that's maybe one way to look at it. I would say we know that it has to be over a certain amount of time. It can't happen in half a second because that's not going to give
Because
enough time.
everything would collapse into the now, as
Yeah,
you said.
and the Bitcoin protocol needs to be able to propagate new blocks throughout the network and process the transaction, get all the nodes up to date.
Yep.
And
Okay.
so it's a
Yep.
global
Yep.
distributed network,
Yep.
right? So it needs to be sufficiently long. Maybe 10 minutes is that. Does it need, I mean, this is an interesting question I hadn't considered, and I don't know that this essay does it. Does it have to be 10 minutes? Well, we do know that it's not exactly 10 minutes. It's probabilistic. Gigi points out that this means really every 1 second interval, there's a 0.16% chance that the miners on the network are going to mine that block, solve the target hash. Um, so 0.16% averages out to 10 minutes. That 10 minutes then, over after a 2-week period, there's a difficulty adjustment done to make sure that it's staying at roughly 10 minutes. So if there's been more guesses happening over time in that network, and so it's been solved faster and blocks being processed in less than 10 minutes, then after a 2-week period, it the network readjusts itself to make it more difficult, to make it closer to 10 minutes again for a block to be processed. I think keeping it irregular, it really doesn't have to be. I mean, it didn't have to be conceptually. It makes it easier for us to plan around and use the network. And so it's brilliant that he does that. But again, like Bitcoin's internal time is tick tock next block. For its non human purposes, it just measures block coming, block coming. That's its tick. The bridge to the real world makes it 10 minutes, right? That difficulty adjustment, that makes it usable by humans. And we do need to know that there is a now in Bitcoin time, which is the tip of the heaviest chain,
Current state of the ledger.
the current state of the ledger. We do need to know that, and then know how long it's going to take to confirm successive blocks in order to have confidence that any one transaction truly has been confirmed by the network. And so if we know they're roughly 10 minutes apart, then we know maybe we can wait an hour, wait 2 hours, and get a sufficient number of confirmations to have confidence that a transaction added in a block is not going to be a chain split, and so then later on discarded by another heavier canonical chain. There's a lot in that. I don't know even if it's worth to disentangle that. It's
Well, I think no, I think it really is, and I think the reason why it is hairy and why it is nasty and hard to understand is because we've come to a very important inflection where we are now being faced with the realization that we're talking about two times. We're not talking about time in terms of seconds and
yeah,
minutes and hours. We're talking about time in terms of work, time in terms of power. And so those are the reason why it is roughly 10 minutes and not definitively 10 minutes or 3 or 20 or 2 hours is because this is the mind blowing, you need to be whatever, 8 bong hits or 12 grams deep in order to understand this, or even be able to like try and break yourself free from this legacy idea that we're natively born into, which is that there is time, minutes, seconds, hours, but then there is Bitcoin time, and Bitcoin time is blocks, and blocks are not distance and speed dependent, which is where we get our time over here. Blocks are work dependent with a with chance,
yeah.
with probabilistic luck involved in them. And so, no, I think this is like this is probably the hardest part for me to understand, which is that we probably need another word for it instead of time, because like block height is, that's how Jack Mallers introduces it on
Yeah,
his show, is he talks about block height.
yeah,
Um, because it is a completely separate thing
Yeah.
from the clock.
Yep.
Yeah. And we are only using the clock to understand it because we understand the clock.
Yeah. No, there was some consideration of that at the Kansas City Bitcoin Summit. Some people were time stamping their real world reaction or interactions with the block height at which they occurred. So instead of referring to we process, things happening at the Bitcoin network, talking about it in real world time, talking about real world events in terms of Bitcoin time, this event occurred at block height such and such. So it is a new notion of time that we can also begin to describe our own reality in terms of a clock that's not manipulable, but is different. The Bitcoin protocol is a decentralized, probabilistic timekeeping mechanism. It's just different, right?
Yeah.
And Satoshi, he knew how important this was to the Bitcoin network. He called it a time chain in the code, not a blockchain. We get that later. Blockchain because that structure of causally linking blocks. It's very helpful to picture it that way. It's good terminology in that sense. But really, the main innovation of Bitcoin is how it enables us to independently agree upon a history of events without a central coordinator. We have a distributed timestamp server, right? We have a distributed notion of time where we can assign time to events in a distributed manner without a central coordinator. And it's mind blowing that is able to occur. Again, something we talked about before in the last conversation was, it's even brilliant to begin to have the thought that we need to bring time into the digital realm, because without time, we get instant abundance, right? It's a nice thing about digital and informational space. Copy and pasting is good for many purposes. We can copy value and you can get the value and I can still have it. I can send you an MP3 and I can still have the MP3 and we can both have the song, right? And so there's almost this like utopic nature to what happened in the early internet, where it was unleashed free without central coordinators, database operators tying down their data, where you could just give but also keep. And that's not something that occurs in the real world. In fact, as we read Jeff Booth's book, Price of Tomorrow, that's kind of the vision he thinks that we're going to get in meat space is abundance through AI. We're going to kind of bring the digital into the physical, almost in a sense, even as in the digital, we're trying to bring the physical to constrain and tie down the digital. We want to bring the digital into the real world to enable abundance outside of time and space through machines that are going to do our work for us and AI is going to power them or something.
Yeah. Just to continue to hammer home the difference between time and block height or Bitcoin time, is that we may have a hard time grasping the Bitcoin time because our definition of time is that it's something definite. It's seconds, it's minutes, it's hours, it's days. But where did we get that from? We got that from how long it takes for the Earth to circle the sun, and also how long it takes for the Earth to spin on its axis.
Yeah.
And those we know are not constant. The Earth's orbit does change over time due to the gravitational pull of the sun, which is, degrading over time and things like that.
Yeah.
And also the Earth's axis, right? The poles, we know that the poles eventually shift and that we get a different type of spin. And so that, even though we believe time in the sense that we traditionally think about it, we believe it to be constant. It truly is not. And it's based on something that has variability. And that variability is dependent upon speed and distance.
Yeah. Time is relative for sure.
Exactly. And time is absolutely factually proven to be relative.
Yeah. Another way that block height is a good way to be able to consider time, even in our real world meat space, is Balaji talks about this. We can watermark or stamp reality by putting on the blockchain a cryptographic hash of an event, data regarding an event that has occurred, to preserve a record that at block height such and such, a thing had actually happened. that some random Joe stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square or whatever, that this happened on X date, or at least it, by that date it had happened. We can use the block height structure as a way to create an indelible record of something couldn't have happened later than this.
Yeah.
Yeah. This really, brings us near the end of the essay. The linkage with time is not arbitrary because time is money. Money must be linked to time because it is only thing that we will never make more of. Gold is valuable because it takes a lot. I'm just reading my notes now. I don't even understand. This was the point I wanted to make. Bitcoin is time in two ways, at least. This is where we started the essay off. Its units, Bitcoin, coins, whatever, marks on a ledger, are stored time because we have used proof of work and computation causally with hash one-way functions in an unpredictable way to import time into them and make them valuable. The Bitcoin network is time because it is a decentralized clock. That's an overheated brain way to kind of try to summarize the essay as I roll out of it with a melting down chassis at the end of this, 400-mile. What do they call those races where you go like?
I think they literally call them like death races,
something like
the
that.
200-mile runs and stuff.
I just feel like how the engine to those cars must feel at the end of that, just like overheating and melting, and they go rolling across.
Are you talking about like a Le Mans race?
Yeah,
that's for like 24 hours.
Something like
just
that.
See who can go the furthest.
Yeah, and then
Yeah, and that's maybe that's actually kind of a good example, is who can go the furthest, because so time is money, money is power, power is energy. When you're a wage slave and you go to work and you trade your time for money, you might incorrectly say, oh, I'm not trading my time, I'm trading my skill. But what is your skills? Your skill is just a function of your time. You don't acquire that skill without time, and you don't acquire that skill without the power that you put behind that time, whether it's the power of studying or the power of lifting or shooting baskets or whatever you're doing that makes you valuable. So I think that's where we end up. It's like time is power. Time is power to affect change. If I don't have time, I can't change anything. But if I have time, if I have a low time preference, then I can affect a lot of change in my life. I can look far down the path and I can make long decisions.
Bitcoin is time. So I wrote down some quotes as I was going through this for things that I thought were key, but that maybe I didn't understand perfectly. I thought it would be good to hash out in real time. So I'll read one of the quotes and we'll see if we can, wring the insight from it. Here's something Gigi writes. Proof of work works in a peer-to-peer setting because it is trustless, and it is trustless because it is disconnected from all external inputs, such as the reading of clocks or newspapers for that matter. It relies on one thing and one thing only. Computation requires work, and in our universe, work requires energy and time. So I think what that's saying, and you can give me your interpretation, is so computation is like the digital substrate. It's a digitally native thing. And energy and time are things that happen in the real physical world. Where these two meet, then, computation requires energy and time. It requires this real world inputs. And so to power Bitcoin with computation through proof of work, because that's what proof of work is. You're doing computation to try to solve a hash function, to try to reach the target hash by doing hash functions over and over again until you get the correct result, guessing essentially. You're doing guesses over and over again to try to hit the target. That can only be done through the expenditure of energy and time, which is a form of work. And then that's what we're feeding into the Bitcoin protocol. Does that make sense?
Kind of. The one thing that I want to point out, though, that computation is not inherently digital. Like we're like the human brain is a computer, right? So we're computing, and we could very well conceive that instead of Bitcoin miners, we just have people sitting at a keyboard punching in numbers, making guesses, right? And so all the computer is doing is just that better, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
one of the um, I do want to throw this in because this helps me think about this, is that we cannot undervalue or understate this difficulty adjustment. I know we're past that,
Yeah,
but I
we're
want
not
to.
past it. Yeah,
Okay,
it's
good.
uh-huh.
We're not.
No, no, I have a quote. That's the next quote is
Okay,
about it. So
go
go
for it.
ahead. No, no,
Well, okay. So the difficulty adjustment, the way I think about the difficulty adjustment, this is so brilliant of Satoshi to be able to look into the future and understand that we are starting at a point where people were mining Bitcoin with a desktop computer. And so it was better than you and me sitting there punching
Mhm.
in numbers, but not by a whole lot,
Yeah,
by a lot, but not by the magnitude that we have today with ant miners and even your bidax, even these, these more modern ones. He looked into the future and he realized that what I'm doing is I'm challenging whoever wants to participate in this competition. I'm challenging them to to do work. I'm challenging them to like a feat of strength. And I think of
yeah,
this as Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill.
yeah,
And he recognized that it wouldn't always just be Sisyphus, that soon there would be 100 Sisyphuses,
yeah.
and then there'd be a million
Sissified.
as Sisyphus.
Yeah,
And then not only would there be more, that we would have Sisyphus on steroids
yeah.
and VPC 157, and they would be jacked, and they would be using video cards and
Hmm.
graphics cards in order to do this. They would be stronger,
Yeah,
and so they would be able to, if that rock was, you push the rock up to the top and you get the reward of the Bitcoin. If that rock was always the same rock, and then all of a sudden you've got, instead of the wimpy 90-pound weakling, you've got, you know, um, half Thor, whatever the guy, the mountain, the 6'9", 420-pound mega man
yeah,
pushing this thing up the hill, it'd go too fast.
yeah,
And so we had to figure out a way to handicap that. And it was so brilliant that he was able to do this. And this is where I want to throw in the story about Bitcoin Pizza Day that I just learned this year, which is the reason we have Bitcoin Pizza Day is because one of the guys early in on the message boards who was mining Bitcoin, he thought, oh, maybe I could do this with a graphics card. And turns out graphics cards are really good at mining Bitcoin relative to your regular desktop processor. And so he starts just cleaning house and mining every block because he's able to do it so much more, with so much more power. And he got a message from Satoshi saying, hey, I know that we are going to enter an arms race, and I know that it's going to be a huge competition to see who
yeah,
can have the most powerful chips to mine Bitcoin. I'm hoping to delay that as long as possible in order to allow a greater diffusion and greater adoption. um, would you, be a gentleman and just chill out for a bit? And the guy was like, yeah, cool, no problem. At this point in history, it's very important to understand that Bitcoin quite literally had no value. It had not been there. There was no price for it.
yeah,
And so he created the first ever market for Bitcoin by saying, hey, I like pizza. Bring me two of them. Doesn't have to be, it could be from Domino's, it could be homemade, whatever. And I'll give you Bitcoin for it. And that was his way of giving back to the Bitcoin community and also staving off and somewhat delaying the inevitable arms race um, of chips, as they accelerated to become more powerful and faster at making those guesses.
yeah. Yep. In our last conversation, we talked about what it means for these miners to get better. So the miners are not getting better at doing the math. They're doing it faster and faster, making more and more guesses. So it's not like they're learning how to solve this equation better. This is probabilistic.
There is no way to get better.
Yeah, the only way to get better is just to make more and more guesses, do them faster and faster and faster. Yeah. There's one other quote I wanted to read here because this, I think, summarizes a core piece of this. We talked about causality and unpredictability as necessary to establish time. There was a third thing that Gigi mentions at the end, coordination in order to turn time into timekeeping. You have to have causality and unpredictability for time, and then coordination. So here, I'll just read the quote. This puts a lot of this together, I think, and will make sense, hopefully, after we've now discussed all this material. Quote, timekeeping requires causality, unpredictability, and coordination. In Bitcoin, causality is provided by one-way functions, the cryptographic hash functions and digital signatures that are at the core of the protocol. Unpredictability is provided by both the proof of work puzzle as well as the interaction with peers. You can't know in advance what others are doing, and you can't know in advance what the solution of the proof of work puzzle will be. Coordination is made possible by the difficulty adjustment, the magic sauce that links Bitcoin's time to ours. And we talked about all those parts now. I hope that paragraph makes sense because it takes a lot of work to get there, to understand causality as a cryptographic hash function, a one-way function, unpredictability being added through peer-to-peer interactions of the proof of work puzzle, and then coordination being made possible by the difficulty adjustment. Maybe that last portion is something we didn't. What does that mean? Coordination is made possible by the difficulty adjustment, the magic sauce that links Bitcoin's time to ours.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at that. Then coordination is made possible by the difficulty adjustment, the magic sauce that links Bitcoin's time to ours. So we talked about how the difficulty adjustment links Bitcoin's internal block height time to the 10-minute approximately real world time. So we've seen that that's how at least Bitcoin's time is linked to ours by a difficulty adjustment that keeps the mining of blocks at roughly 10-minute intervals. This then allows coordination in that it allows all of the nodes to be able to coordinate on receiving and propagating the reactions. And it also, I guess, allows humans to coordinate in relation to it. I don't know that I'm catching everything in that, but that's what I got from it.
The coordination, I think, I guess the way that I'm interpreting it from what you're saying is, coordination allows for all the nodes to update to the current state of the ledger.
Yeah, that might be the best way to.
Yeah, and for the mempool to start taking in the new take in the new transactions and create a new pool.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a great essay. What you saw was us working through it in real time, a second time or a third time. We talked about
this eating Mexican food.
We did. And so this is it's a great essay. It's very deep. It's something that, as all good philosophy does, it's something that you really need to break apart and work through yourself. You can skim through this essay and feel like you have a superficial understanding, but then as you go back through it and try to put the pieces together and pull them apart, you see the gaps in your understanding. And as you explain it to yourself, and hopefully as you, dear third-party witness, saw Lucas and I doing, you try to piece the argument together, and you just have to work it out. So
watch Tenet.
Yeah. Or
you can understand that. You can understand this.
What's the one where you had the tattoos on him? Like Memento.
I haven't seen that one.
Oh
no.
Hit stop record and watch this now.
Oh, my brain hurts so bad. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's all I got. A great essay. Dear Gigi did a wonderful job of Bitcoin philosophizing. We need more of this beautiful essay.
Fantastic. We will see you guys.